Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff and first impressions video. Today we're looking at Airfix's 1:600 scale Royal Mail ship Mauretania. So the Mauretania was launched in 1906, and on her launch she was the largest ocean liner ever built, and she held that title for 4 years until the Titanic sister ship, the Olympic, was launched in 1910, which is why you get that line in David Cameron's Titanic film about the Titanic not looking any larger than the Mauretania. But she certainly was. The Mauretania also held the blue ribboned transatlantic crossing speed record both ways for 20 years or so, and was a much loved ocean liner, to be honest. There are still bits of the ocean liner knocking about, so the ship's bell is in the Lloyd's Register reception, for example, and I know that other little bits were saved when she was scrapped in 1935. So she was scrapped just before the war. She did service throughout the First World War as a hospital ship. So at the time that the Mauretania was built, companies like Cunard were trying to get a constant flow of shipping across the Atlantic, and so they were designing ships with running mates so that you had a constant ferry crossing, sometimes 3, sometimes 2 ships, as the technology improved. And the Mauretania's running mate was the very famous Lusitania. And both of those ships get their name from old African Roman provinces. The downside of her ability to travel so fast was that she had a lot of vibration, and she was a bit notorious for, if she was at higher speeds, having quite an uncomfortable ride, especially if you were in second and third class. However, her high speed was one of her saving graces when it came to the First World War, and German U-boats struggled to pin her down just because of her speed. And so she managed to dodge the fate of the Lusitania, and she took troops to the Gallipoli campaign, for example, and served as a hospital ship. I seem to remember that they originally wanted to use her as an armed merchantman, but then it was considered too costly because of fuel consumption to do that. Anyhow, this is the Airfix kit. It is no longer listed. It's been discontinued for a small number of years now. Over the years, it has been re-released a few times, and this is the last re-release of the kit. So originally released in 1964, and basically it was just a rebox in 2014 when this came out. And it hadn't been out for many years before that. I think the late 1990s was the time it was out before that. So when we look at the box, we get this lovely box art, which is pretty much the art that was used right from 1964. The re-release had it in the more recent red box offering. So this is from a time before the red box meant new tool. Nowadays, this would be re-released as a classic kit in a classic box livery. We have a kit number of A04207, tells you that it's 1/600, gives us our 2 paint options, which we'll look at more closely in a sec. The sides of the boxes are exactly the same, and then on this edge we have the 2 paint options slightly larger. So you have her classic civilian paint scheme of Cunard with their famous red funnels, or you can have her in her 1916 to 1918 hospital ship guise, and I'm going to be honest, that's the one I'll do. just because it's a little different. There's a little sign up here that says Decals by Cartograph, which suggests to me that they've changed the decals from the 60s. And when we flip to this side, we have a little bit of history. We have the paint shout out as always. It tells you that it's a skill level 3 and it had 2 flying hours. So let's take a look inside the box. So inside the box we have a single bag with our plastic parts in and an instruction sheet, and instantly we can see that the instruction sheet has been at least slightly updated to a more modern version. Let's open the bag. So we have the instructions in the typical Airfix format of an A4 stapled colour instruction book. Starts at the top as always with a little bit of history and specifications, and I just read through the history. And one thing I'd forgotten to mention was Mauretania had steam turbine propulsion. I think she was one of the first to do that. It had only been developed at the back end of the century before, so it was only a few years old, steam turbine, so it was a little bit of a risk that they did that. Okay, then we have the wash your parts bit. Then we have some assembly instructions as always, and then the assembly key. And then we go to a new layout of the old instructions is how I will describe that. So I'm fairly sure that if you'd opened the instruction book in 1967, this is what you'd have seen as the first step. So let's just take a look. So we've got 2 hull halves, and then we're putting in the bow deck and the main deck separately. And obviously there's a separation there for a well deck. Then we're putting on the wings for the propellers. So we've got 4 of those to put on, and the rudder. Airfix always put their ships on their display stands fairly early on, and I tend to do that, and I think I probably got in the habit of that from building Airfix kits as a lad. But yeah, they're putting the stand on straight away, and then we're putting in the other deck layers. So quite a bit of painting to do right at the start. So get all this painted up before you fit it. And then we have the next deck up being built up with its bulkheads. And we add that on. And then we've got the bridge roof going on. And then at the stern of the ship we've got another deck area, the mast, couple of vents, and there's lots of vents to do on this ship, and then we have the pilot's bridge at the back, some cranes. Then as we drop down we've got a couple of sub-assemblies for the various structures on the upper deck. So a lot of these will be big skylights, filtering as much light as possible into the ship. We've got the foremast there, which has some booms at the base of it, spare anchor, crane. I mean, yeah, in reality, it's not that dissimilar to the Queen Mary 2, is it? Skylights and cranes and anchors, all pretty much doing the same sort of thing. Then we have the funnels being built up. That's interesting. Well, I seem to be missing some instructions. Step 11, step 12, build the funnels. Okay. Right then, well that's interesting. I'm a little short on instructions because I'm going straight to the paint instructions from there. I'm fairly sure at this stage what we would have left to fit is some more ventilators, because they pretty much run the full length of the ship, and we need to fit the lifeboats. Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's have a look at the paint instructions. So the newer format paint instructions, which is nice to see. So you get a full paint page. So Scheme A, Mauretania 1909. It's interesting that they've picked that year. So what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colours. So we've got satin oak for the decks. We've got matte brick red for the underside of the lower part of the hull. We've got gloss white for the upper works, gloss black for the funnel tops and for the upper hull. We've got bright red for the funnels, gold for the propellers, and gloss service brown. I'm not sure what that is for. Yeah, I wonder if that is for railing tops or something like that. Anyway, I have to check that those paints are still made by Humbrol, but you may want to change to your own anyway. But yeah, that's that looks very smart, doesn't it? And if we flip her over, we then have the First World War hospital ship, and I really quite like that. So I suspect that you probably didn't have the hospital ship on the original release. I'm not 100% sure of that. It's just speculation on my part. I think that's probably a later edition. And we're using pretty much the same paints as before. The funnels have been changed to a matte sand, and other than that, it's pretty much the same. Although we have lost the brown, so I don't know what the brown is for. Because having said it would be for railings, there actually isn't any railings. So okay. Fortunately, I've been able to download a set of instructions off ScaleMates. So in step 13, we would have added the funnels and all those ventilators and a couple and all the lifeboats and a couple more skylights, along with all the davits for the boats. So that was the only page missing. But yeah, we've now got that anyway. So from a plastic parts point of view, the first parts out are the two hull halves. And as you would expect, they're a little rough around the edges. So we've got quite a bit of, well, shall we be kind and call it heavy seam, pretty much all the way around the ship. But other than that, not too bad. And this is a nicer hull than the QE2s. I will do a first impressions video of that at some point. What we have, we've got the bilge keels already moulded on. I'm not sure the angle is right. In fact, I'm fairly sure it's probably not, but it's there and it looks the part. But we have all of the portholes, and what they've done is they've just got a raised ring around them, so they're not completely raised. So they look quite authentic actually. And they're very small, so you could drill them out if you want, but with the plastic being so thick and them being so small, I I think you're probably worth just painting them in. You've got all the various different loading doors and what have you along the side, which are raised detail, which undoubtedly at this scale they're oversized, as in they sit too proud of the hull. But again, this kit definitely was designed for people painting with a paintbrush, so that'll look fine once painted. You've got paint marks running there for the boot line, but you've also got little lines running across to denote the seams of the individual steel plates. So you've got them running the length of the ship, you've not got them in the other direction, but that's a detail that still a lot of people don't put on their hulls. So kudos to Airfix for that. It actually looks quite a nice hull. Yeah, and the only clean-up is actually the mould edges. We've got a nice little depression there that's the right shape for the anchor. We've got some massive holes there. I think they're for davits, which is making me think that the davits might be a little oversized. But no, they're all right. And then there's these smaller doors at the top. So yeah, that's actually not too bad. That won't take much to clean up. Let's just check the two halves and see. Obviously, we've not. There's no issues with that other than a couple of connection points where it was on some form of sprue. It's not on a sprue in the box, so it must have been on a sprue when manufactured. So if we just whip those connection points off, that one's broken down anyway, we might be able to get these two halves together. So we've got, it uses the location pin approach, which quite often causes fit issues. Now look at that. I don't think we're going to have much in the way of issues with that hull. It's clamped down in place. I think that hull will go together really well. Nice. Now the parts, as you would expect, are on the old-fashioned tree rather than a sprue frame, and as a result we have some parts that have set themselves free in the process of sitting in the box in a single bag, but we've got the mast there, which has a lot of flash on it. We've got the two stands, which aren't too bad. We've got raised ejector pin marks, so they're easy to clean up. Yeah, they can be tidied up all right. And then we've got the 4 funnels, which have got their pipework already moulded on. One of them's got a bit of flash on it, but actually it's not too bad. That looks all right. Then we've got the main deck, and as you'd expect from this period of time, we've got raised decks, but that doesn't bother me too much. We've got some nice detail on the stern of the deck there. We need to check our references, but that looks like a skylight, so there's no detail marked on that, but we can possibly paint the windows in or something like that. But we've got all the various key fittings on there. The moulded on bulkheads don't have any windows. There's no way there wasn't windows in there. So again, we'll have to check the arrangement and perhaps do something fancy with the painting of that. So maybe paint the whole thing the window colour, cut out some little masks and then spray paint it all white, something like that. But yeah, you'd need to do some work to make that pop out, but you've got all the basic shapes correct. This is one of the upper decks, and it's got doorways moulded in and things, but no doors, so a little bit of scratch building needed. So there's a bit of sink in a couple of these parts, but it's nothing major. And a big ejector pin mark, so whether that needs filling or possibly removing or covering, it depends. There might be skylights going over there and they're covered up anyway. Yeah, I think that might be the case. But other than a bit of flash, there's nothing wrong with those really. Right, so we've got a number of different parts on this tree. So we've got different bits of deck with very, very chunky plastic ladders. We'll have to see what we can do with that and what's possible at this scale. We've got some very chunky anchors. They're huge. Might be able to thin them down a little bit. We've got the cranes, fairly featureless, but once cleaned up and put a little bit of easy line across them and what have you, we could make them look better than they are. The pilot's bridge there, yeah, and the propellers, they're pretty chunky as well. And then all the skylights, all the windows are raised. So it is what it is. You just paint them up and it becomes a bit less noticeable when they're painted. She has a lot of skylights. She also has a lot of vents, and I'm pleased to say that other than a bit of heavy seam, there's nothing wrong with these. You want to go in with a knife and just thin down the edges a little bit, because the openings are, the walls are a little bit thick, but other than that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with those at all. They'll clean up quite nice. The time, it'll be a bit time consuming, but you can make these look quite good. So yeah, nice. This Spirou has all of the davits. Well, I say all of them. At least one of them must be in the box somewhere. And then we have this deck, and again, these really thick steps, which if we can't replace them with photo etch ladders, then what we can do is just thin them down a little bit to improve the look. Again, quite a bit of flash, and the bridge windows need a little bit of work. Yeah, there's nothing too wrong with that. You've got all of these things here would be for the ship's boats, I think. The main thing is the parts are all nice and straight, there's no warpage, they're not twisted, so yeah, not bad at all. Davits are a bit basic, but again, a little bit of easy line. It'd be surprising how well they look under paint. We have more vents here of different sizes, and these have not been as lucky. So there's a lot of flash on those. So, I mean, it's all basic cleanup, but a huge amount of flash on those. So, ships, boats, and one or two other structures. We've got the rudder there. That's the anchor crane for the front of the foredeck there. The ship's boats have some very heavy pins underneath for locating them, so we'll have to have a look at what we want to do with that. and we've got various other structures. That's the base of the mast, and then we've got a very wibbly wobbly mast. Yeah, we will definitely have to replace that, I think. Yeah, okay. The mast ain't great, but everything else is not too bad. And we've got two deck sections. Not much to say other than their raised deck lines, and no windows and doors on the bulkheads, but everything's nice and straight. So on this sprue we have the parts for the propellers that the propeller shafts would have been inside, which are a little bit flashy, but not too bad. We have more davits, and we have more vents. Unfortunately, this time these are all solid, which is a little disappointing given that all the others weren't. And then we have a very nice looking bow deck, which has got actually some very nicely moulded on anchor chain. Then on this one we've got the two bulkhead sections, which has got some windows in, some door openings. That compared to the other bulkheads we've seen, that's quite nice. But this looks quite distorted. In fact, this piece looks not good at all. So if I put that on my cutting mat, I can see that one's straight, and that one is anything but straight. What we got there, 3mm, 4mm. So yeah, a little bit of work there. We've got another deck section with bulkhead, which has got openings in, and wedge style staircases, all par for the course for the period. We can probably, that's solid plastic, so we can probably cut the wedges out and thin that out a little bit. It is what it is for the period of time. It's an old kit. You go in with your eyes wide open. And then left in the bottom of the box is the few parts that came off the sprue. So we've got another skylight there. Other than cleaning off the flash and the heavy seams, there's not much work on it really. And then we've got all these, mainly davits. You can see how they've come off because they're hook shaped, so they'll catch on things all the time. But yeah, that's the plastic parts. So when we get to the decals, we have a decal sheet which gives us the Mauretania logos, and then some depth markers, which is nice to see. Thank you very much, Airfix. And then the vast majority of the decals are to do with the hospital ship livery. The green decals are nicely done. You've just got to stitch them together along the length of the hull. These look like the two stern ones, and then you'd stitch it all together with the gaps for the red crosses. So that should all look pretty nice actually when done. I'm looking forward to that. And then and because the cartograph, they are absolutely lovely. And then we've got flags, and what they are is die cut on like a sticky back paper. So I think I would have preferred decals that I could glue to foil, but the flags themselves look quite nice. So it's a red cross flag, and then you've got the other sort of flags that would have normally been carried on the ship when she was on her transatlantic crossings. Yeah, that's all good. So there we have it, Airfix's 1:600 scale RMS Mauretania. What are my first impressions? You know what? For a kit of this age, it's actually very nice. I'm fairly sure that when this was first released, it was seen as a really nicely well done kit. It captures the main essence of the Mauretania. Obviously, by modern standards, it's lacking a lot of detail, and we've got some issues. The most significant issue being that foremast that's all bent and twisted. Otherwise, it's it's a reasonably okay model. It's not going to blow your socks off. But to be honest, once you've cleaned it all up, you're going to get a fairly good representation of the Mauretania for the scale. And with a little bit of rigging and a little bit of thought about how you paint it, actually it shouldn't look too bad. Like I say, I'm going to probably do it in the hospital guise because I think that just looks different. On your display shelf, it'll be quite eye-catching, that. So especially if you've got other liners, which will all generally be that type of colour scheme, and that looks quite nice, doesn't it? So yeah, there we have it, the RMS Mauretania. So if you do see one of these kits knocking around, pick it up, build it, do the right thing, and get it on your shelf. Okay, hope that was helpful. Thanks for looking in. Enjoy your modelling. Take care, everyone, and I will see you very soon.